Bitcoin accumulation country. You know what time it is. You know what day it is. I'm your host. This is Coin Icarus, or Phil, and this is the Fun with Bitcoin podcast. We are in season 3, and this is episode 31. Hope everybody's having a great week. Thank you very much for joining me. I've got a really great show with fellow podcaster John Vallis. Now, I've been following his podcast on and off since he started, and I really like his style of interview. And we actually met on the quarantine and drinks from Bitcoin Magazine, and just totally hit it off. And had to approach each other to sit down and have a rip about Bitcoin. So that's what we did, and it was absolutely awesome. So before we get into that, though, we are going to take a look at dollar cost averaging and Swan Bitcoin. For anybody who is interested in dollar cost averaging and who wants to be purchasing Bitcoin but doesn't want to be spending their time constantly watching the charts and listening to traders that they really have no idea whether these people are credible or not, and you kind of just want to put this in in a passive sleep mode where you're simply just accumulating and hodling, being able to transfer that Bitcoin out to your own private address. So if you're interested in doing that and that falls in your wheelhouse, then you are looking for Swan Bitcoin. With Swan Bitcoin, the 3 main takeaways are we can do automatic withdrawal from a bank account, automatic purchases of BTC. You can time them based on your when you receive your check. You can do it let's say once you can do it once a month. Or you can do it per pay period as well. There's lots of options for you to be able to customize how you purchase. And you could automatically withdraw to your chosen address. So if you're interested in a Bitcoin-only platform that is doing the great work of helping onboard people, then you definitely want to check out Swan Bitcoin. I'm going to have the link to their website in the show notes. Hope you're sitting comfortably. Buckle up, because here we go. Here is my chat with the host of Bitcoin Rapid Fire, John Vallis. All right, everybody. Thank you very much for joining me on the Fun with Bitcoin podcast. I've got a fellow podcaster with me that I recently got to really meet on, I'd say that was the Bitcoin Magazine, the quarantine, the Drinks and Quarantine talk.
Drinks and Quarantine, yeah.
That's right. And he does the podcast Bitcoin Rapid Fire, which is a Bitcoin-only podcast, and I definitely suggest people go check it out. And if you don't know who I'm talking about yet, I'm talking about Mr. John Vallis. John, thank you so much for coming on my podcast, man. I really appreciate it.
Coin Icarus, it's a pleasure. Long time coming, and I'm super pumped to be with you, man.
Awesome. Very cool. Yeah, me too. I've like I said to you before the recording, I've checked out your podcast here and there, and I always read, the comments and everything like that, and people really love your stuff. And because I've checked you out a few times, I just find that you're really a great speaker, and you're able to. I think that you're able to draw people in. So it's awesome to to get you on here and talk about Bitcoin with me. So,
well, thank you, man. I really appreciate that. I echo it back to you. And like I said, I'm just excited to jam with you, man.
Cool.
Should be fun.
Okay, so look, I personally, I do not know your rabbit hole story. I'm sure some listeners do, but I don't. And I'd like to know, before you got into Bitcoin, why you got into it, like how are we having this conversation now,
Right. Well, I'll try to, it's funny about telling the rabbit hole story that every time I tell it, I find that there's new details that I kind of forgot were part of it before. But I guess it goes something like this. Always been a curious person. Always wanted to know more about everything pretty much. And then, and I smoked, weed in my teenage years, and but I always would be like, I was very much into fitness as a teenager too, right? So in high school, I was, going to the gym a lot, and, I was taking care of my body. That's always been a big priority for me. But when I had all my workouts and my work done, I'd smoke weed and chill with my girlfriend, and we'd have kind of conversations about, death and the universe. And, we just got off intellectually on each other, and other ways, of course. And then it was sometime, and I was an avid Amazon, person. I'd be buying, boxes and boxes of books on a regular basis about, pharmaceutical industry, the Israel lobby, tales of an economic hitman, like trying to piece together an understanding of the world, I guess, as many of us do. And doing so started to make me feel like the world wasn't in such a good spot. And that's like, I've always been a pretty content and happy person, but I was starting to realize that a part of that happiness was like kind of ignorance is bliss sort of thing. Like I didn't, the world wasn't what I thought it was, is what I'm trying to say. It was far kind of darker than I had learned growing up, unsurprisingly. And I think around this time I had come across movies like Zietgeist and other things on YouTube that are talking about disparate things from religion to banking to, all of that kind of stuff. And I was disheartened. I was like, man, this is bullshit, the way that the world is working. And I didn't see a way for myself, like I didn't see a way for it to be changed. The forces were so kind of gargantuan that I didn't see how these could be turned around. And so I thought like the best pursuit was just to kind of manage me. And the form that took at the time was to take my, humble savings that I'd accrued over, my early working years and put it into gold to protect myself against what I felt was, debasement of currencies all over the world. And then kind of pursue as like my primary intellectual pursuit, spiritual, for lack of a better term. I know that word has a lot of baggage, but, kind of spiritual pursuits. Like I wanted to learn what was kind of beyond our normal consciousness, learn, what
we're going to talk. Yeah, we're going to talk about that. Sorry to cut you off.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, so, cause as part of this journey about learning about how the world works, you learn about, how power works and who's in power, and you learn about ancient cultures and stuff like that. And there's this theme of all of them having some kind of ritual or ceremony or method of altering consciousness. And I always thought, like, why is that such a critical, important aspect of these advanced cultures in many cases? And so that led me down that rabbit hole. I went down to the Amazon in 2008 and 2009 for about 4 months each time to spend time with a shaman there and learn about ayahuasca and have several experiences and things like that. And then and this was kind of the period where I lost myself a bit, because I'd always simultaneous in high school was learning about finance and the stock market, because I wanted to be rich. And I thought that's the way to go. Manage money, get money. So in high school, I was reading, Benjamin Graham's security analysis and all of Warren Buffett's books and, all that kind of stuff. And even though my university years, I had kind of dramatically shifted from being like super materially oriented to this more spiritual track that I was on, but I still wasn't willing to let go of that dream. I really felt like America was on the decline in terms of global economic superpowers. China was rising, and I thought, I'm just going to go over there and see what I can make of myself. So I came back from the rainforest for 10 days, basically just switched out my bags and bought a one-way ticket to Shanghai and thought I'd figure it out. I'd just, see what happened. And so I lived in a hostel for a few weeks, and I was applying to all these different wealth management firms in the city, because that was those were the places that were hiring foreign talent, And wealth management in offshore, what they're called markets, it's a financial sales job. Really, it sounds illustrious, like, oh, you're managing people's like investments and savings, which you are, but your 99% of your job is sales. You're right. You're selling financial products. But anyways, I was having no luck, and I'm a huge UFC and MMA fan, and I got on a forum, and because I wanted to go watch one of the UFC fights that was happening that weekend, like 4 weeks after I'd arrived or something. And I wrote the forum admin and I said, where's this fight going down? How can I attend? Blah, blah, blah. And this guy wrote back and said, it's on this address, come, there's a gang of us watching fights all the time. So I thought, great. I go there by myself. Or actually, no, the Brazilian guy from the hostel that I met, he came with me. And I ended up just taking a seat and watching the fights. And the guy sitting next to me, I ended up striking up a conversation with him. Turns out that he was the one who answered my query on the forum. So we started chatting, asked me what I was doing. I told him the story I just told you. And he said, "Oh, that's funny. I'm recruiting for the largest wealth management firm in the city. And, do you want an interview?" And so I said yes, and went and got the interview, and worked in that capacity in that company for about 3 years. Really hated it. All those feelings that I had kind of against the system and thinking that things were structurally wrong and that kind of stuff were only amplified. And so I left 2013, I believe. And I started studying natural medicine. I studied that for, I got a 3-year program, and then I went back to Shanghai and worked in that capacity. But the reason why all this is relevant is because at some point I remember hearing about Bitcoin, and I was hearing about it because in my pursuit of kind of learning about psychedelics, DMT, of course, is one of the substances that you hear about, and the Silk Road was obvious, notorious for a place where you could acquire drugs, and DMT was available there. And so my buddy who was interested in this stuff with me told me about it, and we looked at it, and and it was like, "Oh, you got to get this Bitcoin stuff to buy the DMT." Anyways, we never did it, but after that time, or shortly after, I started hearing Andreas's videos, and very interested, both politically and financially, and all of that kind of stuff. Actually, more so politically, because I didn't see it as an investment opportunity. I wanted it so bad to be a thing that existed in the world to disrupt central banking and the fiat currency system that my investment hat wasn't on at all. Anyways, of course, like many people, follow it, but don't dive in for a while. And then on a trip to Bali in 2014 or 2015, we were in Ubud, which is kind of up in the mountain part of Bali, where lots of natural health and yoga stuff going on. And at a co-working place, I checked it out one day because I was interested in tech and startup world. And I just missed a talk about Bitcoin. And I was like, damn it, I really want to learn more about that stuff. And this girl said, "Oh, that's cool. Why don't you and your girlfriend come to dinner with me and my boyfriend tomorrow? We'll talk all about it. I'll get you set up." And I was like, "Oh, perfect." She was like, "Yeah, here's my email. Email me tonight. We'll set up a time." Amazing. I email her, no response the next day. And so I was crushed, right? Because I wanted to learn about Bitcoin, and I wanted to see what was going on, and I wanted her to fill me in, and I wanted to get set up. And then the next day I was down in the coastal part, a very touristy area. And there was actually a retail store on the corner next to where I was staying that was like a Bitcoin store. Like all they did was they got you set up with a blockchain.info wallet and helped you buy, like they would take your American dollar currency and they'd help you buy Bitcoin. So I went in there. It took like an hour for some reason. I can't remember why. Gave them some money. They set me up with a wallet, and there I was, had my first sats. And then from then on, the typical story where you just keep learning and keep learning and keep learning to this day. I'm still, my rabbit hole story is still ongoing, right? Because not only is there always more to learn, but impossibly, like I feel like it's not possible my conviction could be higher, but it ends up being higher like week to week, month to month as we go forward. So, I know that was a bit of a long one, but that is basically how I came to it all.
Oh no, man, that was absolutely awesome. And I obviously have to go back and ask you now a bunch of questions because I feel like we have more in common than I thought. So, okay. Fitness and weed. That's definitely interesting. So, I mean, I've never been much of a fitness buff, but like I've always skateboarded and I've always snowboarded, and it's something very interesting because I've always grown up with a lot of people who spent a lot of time at the gym, and I find it funny that they, it's like they won't smoke cigarettes, they won't do anything else, but they'll smoke weed. So it's kind of that's like that. When you said that, I'm like, that kind of makes sense. It's like it's the it's the way to chill. But the other thing I wanted to ask you about, because you said you were a huge book reader and you were piecing the world together. Mm-hmm. So do you have any specific books that that like stuck with you from that time that like to this day people still like if they ask you, you're like, that's the book you need to start with. Start with this and then move on.
Not really, but partially that's because I have a horrible memory for that kind of stuff. But perhaps the ones that I just drew from memory, because I ended up ordering probably hundreds of books, and I just remember maybe the last big box I got 10 years ago plus was, there was one called APAC, and it was all about the Israel lobby in the U.S. And then there was Tales of an Economic Hitman, which was by John Perkins, I believe, and he just details the way in which people, basically agents of different economic and financial organizations, like state financial organizations from all over the world, go all over the world, and they broker deals with less financially well-off, less wealthy countries, and they get them into debt, and then when they can't repay their debts, they leverage that for some benefit for the country that originally issued the loan, which still goes on today. I mean, like China's Belt and Road, there's been a lot of criticism of it for doing something very similar with, like countries in Africa and stuff. They say, we're going to lend you a bunch of money, and then they can't pay, and they say, okay, well, just give us your ports and your resources and your all this kind of stuff. And so those were interesting books, but I can't pinpoint one that was really like, oh, that one helped piece it together, because there's so much to piece together. I don't think you can find it all in one book. So I'm afraid I don't have a great answer on that one.
That's okay. No, hey, listen, you know what? I always like to, the reason why I ask it is because I've read so much, and I don't even know. You
have one?
Exactly. Like I was just going to say, I don't even know which one I would suggest to anybody, right. to be perfectly honest. But like one of the first books I would say that really, really got me to start like questioning things or just deciding to think a little deeper was a book called Many Lives, Many Masters. And that was a book, I believe he was a therapist, and he was doing like past life regression therapy or something. And essentially you're reading his notes about people talking about their past lives in their current life.
Interesting.
So it's very interesting stuff.
And actually I'll backpedal a bit. I think I have two answers. One is like way back. So when I was, I think 12 years old, I was always playing out on the streets with the neighborhood kids, right? Like just playing basketball or whatever. And one of the neighborhood girls who was my age showed up on the street one day, and she had skipped a grade, right? Like she went from grade 4 to 6 or whatever. And when you're a young kid, you fucking hate school. So,
of course.
I was like, how the hell did you skip a grade? And she was like, I don't know, I just read a lot. And I was like, whoa. You just read a lot? Like that's it? And you just become smarter? And she was like, pretty much. And I was like, oh, okay. So like I was like, cool, thanks. And I went home that day, and I went to my dad's bookshelf, and my dad had like a modest bookshelf with a few hundred books, and they were like, business and strategy, and a couple like hero's journey type tales. The Celestine Prophecy was nuggeted in there, and then there was like some psychology stuff. And the first one I picked up was called Hidden Power: Unleashing the Power of Your Subconscious Mind, I believe was the
I've
title.
Absolutely heard of it. Yes.
Yeah. And just kind of pulled it out of the dark, like, sounds cool. And I go down in the basement and I read it. And it was, in hindsight, it was like a pretty influential book, because I'd never really thought of my mind in the terms that it was describing and exploring. And so realizing that like there was another kind of subcomponent of my mind that could either be an ally or an enemy, and there was ways to leverage it to become an ally, like that was pretty influential for me, for sure. And then later on, during this kind of trying to piece together the world period, one of the ones that it might have been early in the game, like as a fun, because you wonder, like, why is America and Canada like Canada, and why is Europe like Europe, and why is Africa like Africa, and why is China like China? Like what accounts for the different degrees of development and culture and prosperity and all this kind of stuff? And so I came across Jared Diamond's Guns, Germs, and Steel, right? Because that is a way of looking at the development of history through the lens of a couple extremely influential processes that allowed for, whether it's more innovation or whether it's better weaponry or more dense cities and the fostering of diseases. And so he looked at history kind of through the lens of a little bit luck, but these things that meant that the reason why the world kind of looks the way it does today is because of these variables and how they interacted with each other and shaped the world. And so that was cool. Then you're like, oh, interesting. And then you build on top of that to piece together why things are the way they are in the modern world. But those two books, in hindsight, those were probably pretty influential.
What was the second one? Guns,
Germs, and Steel.
Germs and Steel.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
And it was by Jared Diamond. He followed that up with a book called Collapse, which was looking at primarily, if memory serves, the fall of Easter Island, right? So Easter Island had this,
Yep.
Developed civilization.
That's right.
Moai statues and stuff, and then it kind of disappeared, right?
Yep, that's right.
And he looked at it through the lens of what causes a civilization to collapse, and it's because it's an island. It's a great microcosm and a great case study. And he looked at resource depletion that led to conflict, that led to disease, that led to until when like modern explorers finally showed up, there's a few people there, no memory of like the richer cultural past that they had. So
if you watch Ancient Aliens, it was the aliens that were over there. It's so brutal, man. Ancient
Aliens is brutal. But I do like I'm fascinated by the thinking and research of guys like Graham Hancock, who have gone all around the world to, the most ancient sites, whether they be in Egypt or Turkey or Peru or Easter Island, and notice a lot of kind of aesthetic similarities or technological or aesthetic similarities in their writings or their iconography or their architecture. And, he hypothesizes that there was a more ancient civilization prior to, let's say, like the earliest ones we're aware of in Sumer and ancient Egypt.
Oh yeah,
and that was advanced, but which was destroyed. And he makes a case it was a flood brought on by asteroid hitting the ice caps in the northern part of the world and sea level rise by 500 feet and all that jazz. And but the survivors spread out across the world to Asia, to South America, to wherever, and only with kind of a piece of like only a vague memory and only some knowledge or wisdom from the civilization from which they originally came, and they restarted anew. And that's why you see a lot of similarities in architecture, technology, art, like that kind of stuff in these disparate ancient sites around the world. Who knows? But I find it interesting.
Oh, absolutely. And it's interesting that you talk about how, bringing all of those together and showing their commonalities, because back when I was in college, I guess it was like a project on demonology. And I had the idea essentially that all the different magical languages were really all just the same. They all reverted back to one magical language, which essentially goes back to the ancient Sumerians. Right, because they were the first for us, right, for our civilization, because Sumeria disappeared and then we sprang from supposedly Babylon, right? But essentially the mystic teachings, we'll say, okay, like spring from that time. So, symbolism, the symbolism that's used today. So it was a very interesting project, but to your point, there was a lot of commonalities, and it's just interesting how different people in different places can come up with can conceive of the exact same ideas, right? The exact same divine ideas, the same ideas of higher consciousness, without ever having speaking. They've never spoken, they've never exchanged ideas, but yet that they were able to tap into that, infinite intelligence, so to speak.
Yeah, and that's a perfectly plausible explanation as well. And I think that's the one, for what I was referring to about kind of Graham's work, that's the one we would default to, absent kind of any evidence or even belief that something came earlier in prehistory, because it doesn't fit our linear models, right? To think that like there was an advanced civilization in our distant past, because we see things as progressing and modernizing and developing technologically as we move forward. But and so that's why I say, I mean, who knows? But I find it very interesting, and I've been to Egypt and explored, the pyramids and the ancient temples and all that kind of stuff, and it boggles the mind to think that, because Egypt and Sumer were relatively contemporary with each other, and I think Egypt was even more advanced as far as the stuff that I've looked at, or refined, and to think that we don't have really anything in the region as far as culture or civilization before the Egyptian civilization. We have, there was kind of there was the unification of Egypt, whether it was 3500 BC or something like that. But like all the things that we have in terms of statues and hieroglyphs and temples and stuff basically started with Egypt, and it was incredibly well developed, right, seemingly out of the gate, and so well developed and so like perfect that it didn't change much for like 3,000 years. Like, can you imagine? We can't imagine 10 years without dramatic change right now. But like, it always kind of was a big question mark in my mind that, one, how did it come out of the box so highly developed with so much we still don't understand about it, whether we're talking about like kind of the religious aspect of the civilization, or obviously their architectural capabilities and sophistication. But they got to that place, and then they were just like, this is what we were striving for, and we're just going to mainly hang out here for the next 2,500, 3,000 years and not change a hell of a lot in terms of the way the civilization looks. It's all, there's so many question marks, and I find all that stuff very fascinating. And who knows? Who knows?
I totally agree. And of course, there's, the mystery of the Sphinx and, the pyramids and the Eye of Ra and all of that, which totally gets wrapped into, mysticism today. It's the basis. A lot of it is the basis even for, Freemasonic ritual. A lot of it comes from, the Egyptian symbology. So it's very, well, they use Egyptian, it's Greco-Egyptian. But, okay. Talking on this path though, because you were mentioning, you're mentioning spiritual pursuits. Did you ever happen to read one book that totally caught me? Was James Frazier's The Golden Bow?
No.
You might want to. That's a super interesting one, and it essentially it explains, because you were talking about ritual before, right? And it's very interesting because essentially what I ended up learning was that you could technically do a ritual as long as the symbols are correct, right? As long as the symbolism is correct with what it is that you want to do, you can make a ritual out of anything. So that's something that I found really interesting. And James Frazier's The Golden Bow essentially talks about the different rituals and beliefs throughout history of like different tribes and stuff like that. And it's very interesting. It gives you anyways, it's a big book, but it's a great read.
I'll add it to the list, man.
Yeah, man.
There's still so many I need to read, but I go through periods. I'm like, I've done too much reading for a while. I need output, not input, basically. And so I do that, and then I'm like, I'm starving for some new stuff to chew on, and then I go through a big reading binge. And of course, a lot of it is Bitcoin and over the last few years.
Yeah. Do you do Audible?
I was an Audible person for a long time, and then I don't know why I stopped it. I should probably get back on it, but there's something, I like having the book because I really like to give books away. When I'm done, I like to, if I come across somebody that I think would like it, I just like to give it to them. And obviously you don't get that chance when it's Audible. So, but it makes traveling more cumbersome and stuff like that too. So. And I used to back in my backpacking days, I used to like write my email in the inside cover, and I'd put it on like one of those book exchange places in the hostel or something, and say, note at the top, like, if you read this book, write your email down and like pass it off somewhere. And I'm always I'm wondering, like, when will I get an email from someone's like, dude, I just read your book, thanks for like dropping it off. It hasn't happened yet though, so those books are probably destroyed.
Well, maybe, but sometimes, it's interesting, right? It's kind of like you said when you were at your father's bookshelf and you happened to pick out that one book. I'm a firm believer. I don't believe in coincidences. Like I just believe that we do things, and we either wrote them in before we ever materialized or whatever it is. But I don't believe in coincidences. So for me, eventually, it's like the right person, the person that is meant to pick up that book will, and the person that was meant to write you will.
Right.
They just haven't met it yet.
Sure, but is there free will if there's no coincidences?
So, but that's okay. So that's like a whole. I've thought about that, but like, what now? We have to define what free will really is. Mm-hmm. It's like.
Well, do we?
Like, how is it? Let me ask you this:
are we able to make our own decisions?
But how is the lack of coincidence not making our own decisions? Right.
Well, because it supposes that there's something that's pre-written. Right.
Well, there's something that you pre-wrote, not necessarily somebody else.
So we're kind of acting out our own movie that we wrote.
Maybe. I don't know. We could be. I don't know. I always love to think about stuff like that. It's just it doesn't, like, for me, because I don't believe in coincidences, and it's right. I always think, okay, well, if I don't believe in coincidences, then what about free will? But then, like, what if I already wrote this in? It's like, what if I created this script? Mm-hmm. I don't know that. I don't know that somebody else didn't.
Could be. Could be. Yeah. And, I like thinking about that kind of stuff, free will and decision making, in the context of, other contexts that make you question, like, are you really choosing? Like, how much of it is your, how your emotions or thought processes are mediated by, like, your microbiome and the bacteria that's in your gut? Like, how much does that influence your levels of serotonin? How much does that influence how, like, whether you're going to go for this experience or that, or this food or that? It does actually impact us. So it begs the question, like, does it push us over the edge one way or the other? And if so, are those fucking things in our guts making decisions for us? And if so, what decisions are we making? Who are we?
You make an excellent point, and I totally forget where I read this, but essentially what I read about was that technically everything is drugs, okay? And the fact that we create this distinction, right, between, like, illicit drugs and, like, the legal ones and everything, it's a load of crap. Because when you go and drink, let's say, Coca-Cola or something like that, the sugar is impacting the chemistry of your body. And that is a chemical change, which is exactly what's happening when you smoke weed or whatever it is. It's just a different set of chemicals that are reacting. So to your point, right? I do. I think that to a certain extent, I think that might be where the mindfulness exercises come in, right?
Totally.
Because right there, like, that would be the only way to mitigate, the emotions and the physical body from being part of that decision process.
100%. Like, I think that mindfulness stuff, or kind of a stoic discipline attitude or approach towards your life, like that, I think that's why those practices, part of the reason why they're so useful or beneficial and have been used for so long, is because they kind of give you back a fuller agency. We can't say that you have, like, complete agency, because as a physical being in the physical world, you're probably going to be influenced by a great many things that are kind of sub-perceptual. But I think, part of the idea there is, doing things with the utmost intent and agency. Like, if you're going to do something, you're doing it because you've made as clear a possible decision to do so as you can, and who knows? But I think you're right. I think, mindfulness, stoicism, discipline, those are all intertwined in that process.
The intent is definitely important, right?
No,
like
it's most important.
It's all about the will, right? What is it? It's persistence. Got to keep at it. So, okay, we're gonna switch gears a little bit from from that stuff and just kind of start to go down a little bit with Bitcoin. Okay, so let me ask you this. This is just, like, more kind of, like, generally, just getting your thoughts on, I guess, the state of, like, the economics today. Like, what do you think is so difficult to grasp about deflationary currency? Like, this is something I find, like, people, for some reason, the human mind has no fucking problem making numbers bigger. Like, we have no problem with just adding and adding and adding, but for some reason, a deflationary type of currency, or like Bitcoin, for some reason people just like they mentally check out at the 21 million. Like I'm talking about no coiners, like certain no coiners, they will mentally check out at that 21 million. What do what are your thoughts on that?
Well, my experience has been the biggest, the people that most fall into the category that you just described are the traditional finance people, like because they were the ones that were trained in the existing paradigm where, of course, an inflation or a currency has to be inflationary, and you've got to have some supply elasticity so that you can have stable pricing, and these sort of arguments. And but for normal people, like it's hard not to get their eyes to glaze over, but they don't really have a problem with, like, look, there's 21 million times 100 million of these things that you can transact with. There's not going to be any more, and that's how that's what you earn, and that's how you spend. And like the average person, because their knowledge is so limited in any of this stuff, they're like, yeah, all right, okay, makes sense. Like I don't see a big deal with that, because most people don't really understand inflation either. Like it's not like the normie is walking around thinking like, it totally makes sense that we have a currency that inflates about 2% a year vis-a-vis prices, and has about a 7% annual monetary inflation rate. Like, yeah, that seems normal. Like as far as I know, that's what it's supposed to be. Like nobody is
no one's having that talk.
Nobody's thinking that way. And I'm the jerk off that has to be like in the grocery store with my sister being like, the bag of chips is $4 now. Do you remember when we were kids? Like we're the old people now. Because like what
Are you kidding me?
When we used to go to the store when we were kids, and like my mom would give us $1, and we'd be like, man, Mom, just $1. And she'd be like, all you needed was a nickel back in my day. And we'd be like, yeah, Mom, but you're so old. And now here I am being like, even when I was a kid, things like that were much cheaper. And people notice the prices, of course, because it hurts their pocketbook. And they're like, the price of homes and the price of food and whatever. In certain cases, the deflation argument is another interesting one to break into. But people know that like prices are going up in certain cases, but they don't put it together. They don't realize that money can be different. They just accept like, yeah, sure, the Fed prints dollars, the Bank of Canada prints dollars, the ECB prints euros, and this is what we use as money. Just get after it and get some, and that's it. Why think anything more of it? Well, I think we're entering a period where people are the answer to that question is going to be because you may find yourself on the losing end of that deal if you don't think more of it, if you don't understand what money is and how it's being manipulated and abused, and how you might be able to protect yourself from that. So, but to your point, like, I don't think it's difficult at all. Like, a deflationary currency doesn't bother me in the least. Yes, if it doesn't have supply elasticity, that means the volatility is going to be all represented in the price. And as a deflationary currency monetizes, i.e., its adoption grows, that's going to mean that there's going to be more price volatility. It's not a bad thing. It's not an unexpected thing. It's a totally normal, expected thing. At which, at the point in time when it's fully distributed, or more or less fully distributed, then I suspect the price volatility will more or less reflect the growth and changes in the economic or productive capacity or output of the jurisdiction or group of people or economy that's using that currency. And that's totally fine and normal. And I don't see a big problem with debt either. Just look, if your money is, let's say, yielding 2%, i.e. it has a 2% annual deflation, then that just means you're going to need to, like, the people who are trying to borrow from you, businesses or what have you, they're going to have to offer you a better rate of return. That means they're going to have to build a more competitive business or bring greater value to the market, versus today, where you lose money on your cash balances. So you have a negative yield on your cash in the form of inflation. And so you're only too happy. Like, if someone comes along, wants to borrow money from you, and they say, we'll give you 1% a year on your money, you're like, sure, take my money here, because I'm losing money if I don't do that. Right. So, that's how debt works in an inflationary currency. So I don't know why people make such a big fuss of it. And, I find it funny that, even gold bugs, who ostensibly are anti fiat money and are pretty much aligned with Bitcoiners in every way except for thinking Bitcoin is a legitimate form of money or a legitimate solution. They make that argument with gold. They're like, yeah, Bitcoin's great, but you need some inflation, supply inflation, and gold's like 1 to 3% is like a nice sweet spot. And like, what the fuck are you talking about? That makes no sense. Like, where is it writ that like, 1 to 3% monetary inflation is like the universal money sweet spot? No, that's just something you have to put up with because of the nature of the substance that you're using and that people have used for money. It's a flaw. It's not a feature, And so Bitcoin represents a solution to that because it's established absolute scarcity for the first time, right? And that is mind-blowingly amazing. Like, and that doesn't get nearly enough press at all. People say like 21 million cap, and you kind of just nod your head and be like, okay, cool. Be like, no. Do you know what that means? It means that somehow it's been figured out how to make something absolutely scarce regardless of the demand for it. Can you think of anything else in the goddamn universe that if you wanted more of it, you couldn't possibly get it other than your subjective experience of time? No, you can't. And the fact that this was created is a really, really big deal. And it makes for the best form of money, because what is money? In money, you're trying to store your surplus, productive capacity and time and energy. And so you want that container for that to be as airtight as possible, whereas everything that we've used prior is leaky. It leaks a certain amount of your time and resources because its supply is continuously growing. So I don't know why it's a hard thing for people to get, but it certainly ain't fucking hard for me to understand.
I totally agree. And that was a totally killer answer, man. Thank you. And just to go back to something that you said in that answer, which I think is very interesting, right? Because in a deflationary currency, the person borrowing now has to provide or produce a better rate of return. Okay? Mm-hmm. So that means, to me, the way I see it, and I could be incorrect, but that to me means like a flight to quality. Because people are going to, in order to be incentivized to separate yourself with that Bitcoin, somebody has to give you something superior. And if something superior doesn't exist, they have to create it. Somebody has to create it. So to me, it seems like I think that goes back to that, the idea of low time preference, which, Bitcoiners know so well, that, this kind of low time preference and deflationary currency actually ends up positively incentivizing the wheels of production in the long run. It's an instrument of a long horizon. That's the way I see it.
I totally agree. I think that process nestled amongst a grander process, but I definitely think that will mean that people who are making the economic calculation to try to bring value to the world or to the market, they're going to have to be more discerning. And the way that you're more discerning in that calculation is, I need to bring more value to the market, right? Like, how much value is it to make the little plastic trinkets at the checkout line of your grocery store? Not much, but with easy, cheap money, because obviously the interest rate is the cost of money, right? And right now we've made the cost of money artificially low. And this means, people want to deploy their capital, and there's so many willing participants be like, well, sure, like, I'll take it and I'll make trinkets, and I'll take it and I'll do whatever. There's really no competition for the capital anymore because the price of capital is so low. And I think you get a bunch of basically garbage as a result of that. And I think if the cost of capital were higher, then you would get people that had to bring more value in the form of products and services to the market. And we would all be better off for that, I think. And we wouldn't be destroying our futures in the form of, all this ridiculous debt and monetary debasement that we're seeing today. So I agree. I mean, I think it's a good thing. I think, and I think the market needs to determine the cost of capital. That's another massive component of this. Like, we have we have so much more socialism than people think, but we definitely have monetary socialism. The government is the other party to every single transaction, because it's the government's product that you exchange, that is being exchanged in every transaction. The government's product is the money, and they have put a price control, just the same as a cartel might put a price control on oil, gold, milk, which is the case in Canada, I learned recently. But price controls always fail because they're not pricing things according to all the different market inputs, right? They're making some other calculation and doing the pricing. And manipulating interest rates is a price control on the cost of capital. And, what we, in a free market, what we should hope to see with a money like Bitcoin that cannot be manipulated or controlled, is the market will dictate what the cost of capital is. And it'll take in all the inputs and it'll determine what the time preferences are of all the different participants. And it will come up with a cost of capital. Maybe it's 2%, maybe it's 18%. The market will determine, and it will find an equilibrium between hoarding money and producing goods and services that the market wants. And it'll find that perfect equilibrium and synthesis between the two, and with all the considerations of quality and quantity and all of that stuff. And that's the way it's supposed to work. And that's the best balance that we can strike as human beings attempting to interact with one another.
I totally agree. It's like, to me, it just seems like we're kind of like using a crutch, right? Like that's kind of what fiat is. It's this crutch that we allow ourselves to use, and at the same time, it also kind of sweeps the leg while we're trying to walk with the crutch. So it's like, it's like we're going to help you along, but we're also going to cripple you while you're, being helped along. So it's kind of like this. Anyways, it's like this double-edged sword that just. That really makes things difficult. And I just wanted to go back to something that you said before about, the cheap things and the, the plastic stuff. The cheap money makes it so that cheap things exist, I think. And it's not to say that you wouldn't have low priced items, right? We're not talking about price. We're talking about the cheapness of the item. Like, no one would be incentivized to make crap if the money wasn't garbage itself. I think.
Well, yeah, because the market will ask. Well, the people with the capital will ask the market effectively, like, how bad do you want it, through the interest rate. And if the interest rate were high, then when the market is asked, how bad do you want, fill in the blank, this shitty trinket at the grocery store, well, the market would say, not very much, via the interest rate, because the interest rate is mediating the time preferences of all the different market participants and basically being the kind of lens through which they determine what is valuable enough to get produced. But when you manipulate that all the way down, then that question of how bad do you want it, i.e. market, how bad do you want it, is like, there's almost like, it can answer the question in the affirmative almost all the time, because the capital is so cheap, because there's just like an endless amount of capital to pump stuff out. So the market doesn't have to want something that badly for something to get produced when the capital costs so little, when there's so much capital. So, I think we look back on this period and it's so fun. I mean, the human story is basically the story of the frog boiling in water, and it's really hard to step outside your own time. But I think in whenever history is told, 50 years, 100 years, 500 years from now, these offenses will be seen for what they truly are, and how egregious the influence, manipulation, abuse, interference, misallocation, et cetera, of the way in which the money and the monetary system is functioning today. And of course, on top of which is layered the political system that derives its power from that, will be really, really, really heavily criticized. And, I hope we're looking back on it from a Bitcoin future. But like, to me, the offenses, I see it. I believe I'm seeing it clearly, and it seems extremely egregious to me. And I think more people will see it that way in the future.
I definitely agree. And I mean, let's call it what it is. We're all just a bunch of tax slaves. So, right. It's that's really, I think, what it is. And it is just a shame. And I do agree with you. I think that this is going to be looked back on as a time of like, how the hell were we so stupid? Yeah. Than to, sit there and, hog tie ourselves in the middle of a marathon. It's like we to let a bunch, just to let a very small cabal of people rule the monetary system of the entire world, it makes no sense. And the sad thing is that there's so many people that are personally incentivized to keep this charade going. And that's that's the problem. I think they just don't see beyond that.
I agree. And I think that, that's one reason why, Bitcoin's incentives and game theory are so exciting, because it has a chance to kind of incent people in a different way and get them into a different kind of loop of rewards. But no, I fully agree with you. I think that's how it's been corrupted. And, what allows them to get away from it is the piece that's been talked a lot about in the Bitcoin space over the last 6 to 12 months is, the deflation story, but like the price deflation story, represented in mostly technological advancement that we've experienced over the last 50 some odd years. And, that allows these, the money manipulators to get away with so much more than probably they otherwise would, because we look at 2% inflation, and even for those observers who care, they're like, yeah, that's tolerable. I can handle 2% inflation. I can get up until, the last couple of years, you could even get it in a fixed note or something like that. But, I can go to the stock market and easily get 8 to 10% conservative. So what do I care about 2% inflation? And the people that aren't investing, it's like, yeah, that really sucks, but 2%, meh. But what if you knew that 2% was really 7, 8, 9%, but you were getting 5, 6, 7% price deflation because of technology? Well, if you weren't getting that, then the 7, 8, 9% annual inflation would probably sting a lot more, and you'd probably perk up your ears a little bit more, and you'd probably be a little bit more upset about it. So, this is part of the dynamic in which we live today, where all of this has become obfuscated for these reasons, and this allows people, among other reasons, as people are busy, this is actually a great point, is that people are so busy trying to keep pace with how things are being degraded through the debasement of the money, that the hamster wheel that they're on is getting faster and faster through time. So like they can't even get off to look and say, wait the fucking second, what the fuck is going on over here? Because they're just so damn consumed with keeping up with the way things are unraveling. And so you can't blame most people for not knowing how a lot of this works, and for not seeing how egregious the offense on the side of central banks and governments are in our current time. But they will, because one, it won't last forever. This game can't last forever. Bitcoin is coming up to put more pressure on the downfall of that system, and obviously we both, and everyone listening, I'm sure, hopes that happens as soon as possible. And the truth has a way of asserting itself over time, and unfortunately, we often have to wait for the history books to see what happened in a given period with a certain degree of clarity. But maybe this time, even if just a few of us can figure it out beforehand, and maybe do something about it and protect ourselves and the people we care about, and maybe that's all we can strive for. Who knows?
Oh, I totally agree. And actually, on to your point, about this all coming to an end. So I'm in the middle. I'm like kind of getting towards the end of The Creature from Jekyll Island, and I don't know if you read that one, but man,
way back, yeah.
Okay, so I mean, we are in the 5th iteration. So we've already seen the central bank fail 4 times before this. Okay, if I understood this correctly. So this is the same, it's the same script being played over and over again with slightly different twists each time and different language. It's always slightly different language, just to make it seem like it's something else. So we're kind of coming up on the end of this central bank's reign. You know what I mean? Like, regardless, let's say, and I hate to say it, but regardless of Bitcoin, that is at an end. You know what I mean? Like it's at the tail end of whatever the hell it is that it's doing. But since we have Bitcoin, we actually have a way out of this. And I think that people don't even seem to realize, like, I never knew that there were 4 iterations of this before. I never knew that there were 4 collapses before this. It's people don't even realize, and it's like, I don't understand. Even it's like our grandparents knew about it. They were around already for one of them.
Yeah, dude, it's so
mind-boggling.
funny. Like, history is, if you and I'm a big history buff. I love reading about it. So like when you read history, basically the whole story of history is change. Like that's how history is
Yeah.
told, through the things that change. But in the present moment, the status quo is so intoxicating that you convince yourself that it's static, that it's unchanging. Like, this is the way things are, and this is the way things will always be, even as fast as like technology is advancing today and things changing. Like, it seems like that's one of the tragedies of history, is that the people in the moment are, again, the frog boiling in water. They don't recognize that they're in the midst of a story of unrelenting change. They think they're in a story of stasis, and that, this is the way the world is and will be, and that's all I need to know. And that is just like, that's exactly the opposite of what history is. History is just change after change after change after change, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down. And like you said, we've seen central banks in the U.S. Fail a number of times before. We've seen presidents warn of the dangers of these institutions. We've seen currency crises all over the world. We've seen governments fuck the money all over the world. We've seen the social and geopolitical implications of a failing money.
Mm-hmm.
And here we are on the precipice of many of those things. And we just think, it's probably going to be okay.
It's going to be okay.
It's going to be fine. It'll be the same. Like, I don't think anything's going to change that much, and but here we are, importantly, like, we're the people, like our historical counterpart was probably, like those kind of rebels hanging out in the French cafes, just thinking like, man, like, what the fuck is going on? Like, all of this is like,
it's true.
What is the government doing? How can they be doing this? How can people not see how fucked up all this is, and how oppressive this is, and how this is going to end badly? So different times, same story. And but interestingly, and I think very importantly, and which is what excites me, like, beyond description, is that this time it really is different, because Bitcoin is a solution that has staying power because of its attributes. Like, before, it was just like, the government's fucked things up again. The money is destroyed. What do? Let's fire up a new government and fire up a new money. But hey, isn't the same thing going to happen? We'll worry about that down the road. And there's just nothing you could do about it. Gold was obviously the best option, but we all know the faults that gold has, and that's why we keep this thing continues to recur, and we just wind up in this model of trust. The trust is broken, the system fails, kick it up again, build it on top of this thing that requires trust. Trust is okay for a while, trust is broken, system fails, and again and again and again and again. This time we have something where that can't happen, where the institutions that emerge because that trust is required won't emerge in the same capacity as they did before. Those the way in which power concentrated as a result of the solutions that were drummed up and the money that was used in that time won't emerge. The power won't concentrate the same way. It won't be able to be co-opted and abused and directed to whoever malicious ends as it was before. And so that is why this is so exciting, because if this can get established, and I think we would both agree that it's going to be, it's going to, although nothing is certain, but if it can get established, then that the change that will come from that is going to be unlike anything that's ever happened. And I think this is why so many of us it's hard not to be like a crazy Bitcoin zealot, because you begin to see what kind of a world is possible when it's predicated on a money system like Bitcoin. And of course, what even blows your mind even further is that Bitcoin is programmable money. So when we encounter things that we want it to do or facilitate, we're going to be able to expand basically the properties and attributes of this money. Whereas before, gold was gold, and you had to kind of just accept what it was, its faults and its benefits all together. And so I think this is the ace in the hole this time. So things are going to are probably going to crumble again. It's going to be a very difficult time. I wish that wasn't the case. I prefer a smooth transition, of course, but if history is any teacher. But off the back of that, the solution that emerges may actually have some staying power that creates a fairer, more prosperous, more peaceful world for everybody. And that is why the fuck I'm here and you're here and a lot of people listening to this podcast are here because yes, we want to improve our lot. We want freedom. We want financial freedom. We want to be able to pursue the things that we find interesting and meaningful and express ourselves. But we also want to be part of contributing to and building that world, And so I just, that's why I'm so excited about all this stuff.
So bullish. Might have to stack after this. But it's interesting that, because just to go back to your point, about being a Bitcoin zealot, I start to feel like this insane idiot, where, the root of all the problems is our bad money. And it's really sad because when you do take a look at most issues, you really can trace it back to bad money. Either it was a person or group of people who had access to this cheap bad money and then funded a cause which shouldn't have funding in some cases. Things like that, specifically endless wars. If we're going to give it an example, the fact that we can fund endless wars with debt that we're just laying on the nation, right? Yeah, at least in the US. I mean, these are just endless wars, and let's be honest, it is just they're just printing money for it. So all that does is make everybody else pay for it, and they're really I don't even know why they're doing that. But let's be honest, it's not about the US themselves. This isn't a war for them. It's not a war for us. It's about the wars are always about the money interests of the wars. They're never about the wars themselves. So it's like, to me, I always feel like a psycho, because I'm able to, you're able to look at almost every single societal problem and be like, look, I'm really sorry, but most likely we could fix this with Bitcoin. Good money would fix this problem. And like, you're just afraid to have somebody to tell you to just shut the fuck up.
I know. It's like every single conversation, like everyone chimes in, like you're having a social circle, you're having a dinner or whatever, and everyone gives their bit and they're like, what about you, John? And you're just like, guys, unfortunately, I have the same response for you. It's about the money. But that's also what makes this so intoxicating and so stimulating, is that level, kind of like all these, like we said at the beginning, and part of my rabbit hole story was piecing together the world. Why does it function in this way? Why does it work this way? And now that you have a thread that brings all those things back to one central point of focus, like it feels like you've got the cheap glasses that you just put on the lenses, and you see, like, it's like kind of the Matrix, right? Like you see the code, the vertical lines of code streaming, like you're like, oh shit, like, and you test yourself. You're like, no, I can't. That can't be right. And then that's why so many of us in the space are just frantically trying to update our knowledge and keep pace with the latest thinking and the latest implementations, and just really try to put pressure and test, this level of thinking and mix it up with people online and stuff. And thus far, I think most of us come back to the conclusion, like, no, it's reaffirming that sense of clarity that we see, that something that kind of like what do they call it in science? Like when a theory is kind of all encompassing.
I am blank on that. A perennial philosophy? No, that's not science. No. That's more philosophical. But a perennial philosophy is all encompassing, though.
Yeah. No, I'm blanking on it right now too. But anyways,
okay.
Nevertheless, the point is just that, like, that level of clarity is amazing. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Once you see how everything is connected, and the central basis of all that connection and the influences of all that stuff, like, I'm sorry, but that seems to be just the way it is. And that's why it's so compelling to focus on that one thing, not get lost in all this noise of all the crazy shit that's going on today. No, focus on that thing, because that lever right there, that's where all the leverage is for the change, that the beneficial change that the world could experience, that thing right there. So let's focus on getting that out of the box. Let's focus on getting that onto the world. And then once we kind of let that change percolate, let that, the influence of that percolate, then let's see what things look like, and then maybe we can come together and devise solutions for the problems that remain. But I agree. It is always, it's so often about the money, like it or not.
It's true. Um, okay, so speaking of money, actually, there's something that I've been hearing a little bit more and more of, and I wanted to ask you if you've been hearing more of this. I'm seeing more news about cash shortages. Have you been seeing that? I kind of see like, random tweets here and there. I've seen some news articles here and there, but of course, as you know, it's very difficult to trust the source of all of this stuff because so yeah, I'm just saying like because personally, if I go to an ATM, which I am not a huge proponent of cash to begin with, unless I have to use it, but I haven't experienced this myself. So, and I don't know anyone who has. So I guess I'm just trying to figure it out from my personal standpoint. Do you know of anyone who has not been able to withdraw cash, or have you experienced this? Or
Well, I've experienced a cash shortage, but that's only because I'm always stacking, baby.
that's the only shortage that matters. That's not a shortage, okay? I like that though. I like it.
I've heard. I mean, I think a lot of governments are trying to move cashless, right? Sweden's done it. China is basically cashless now, and if I'm the government, it makes sense in terms of tracking and controlling things more, and maybe even disintermediating some of the financial system so that cash and borrowing and lending is more directly related to the central bank. We might see stuff like that come online in the future. What I've seen, and I think this is primarily a result of COVID, is that businesses not accepting cash. So any cash that I did have, just lying around to pay for stuff, I'd go up and try to pay for, a Dairy Queen Blizzard or something like that, and they tell me I'd have to use my card. So cash, as a result of the virus, has become sidelined, and I think this, to the extent that governments want to go cashless for whatever their reasons are, this certainly plays into their hands because they'll easily get the political and public will to do something like that because people, cash is an old technology. I mean, I know it's anonymous and there's a benefit to that, a huge benefit to that, but let's be real, most of my transactions are online. Like if I'm ordering stuff from Amazon or other places on the internet, like absent, going out to eat at a restaurant or something, like it's mostly digital money anyways. So I think it's inevitable that cash gets phased out. It's just, we have to, we're hoping that the cash that replaces that ultimately is one that can't be censored and tracked and controlled and stifled and manipulated and debased and that kind of stuff. We're hoping for, obviously, Bitcoin to be that cash. But the reality is, I think we'll have a lot of digital currencies from governments and central banks prior to that. And I see, if for no other reason, that as a matter of operational efficiency, that governments will want to phase out cash in favor of digital payments and stuff.
So speaking of which, that you were just talking about the government stable coins. Actually, there was a tweet that I had saved because I wanted to discuss this with you. It's not yours or my tweet. This actually came out of Shitcoiner, but it was a good tweet. This is from Eric, from Eric.eth. He's one of the ETH heads. Just so everyone is aware, there's a backdoor in the USDC stablecoin launched by Coinbase today, which allows any address to be blacklisted and funds frozen. So this thing got a lot of visibility today.
Did you say that was Coinbase?
Yeah, that was Coinbase.
Surprise, surprise.
So to your point, about the government wanting to track and everything like that, these people that think for a second that these stable coins pose, any competition in any way, shape, or form to Bitcoin, they're just out of their fucking minds.
Oh, because that's the hilarious shit ever when you get token finance, old man on CNBC. They're like, "What do you think about the influence of central bank digital currencies on Bitcoin?" Like, they're dead in the water. The whole thing they've been fighting for, the governments are going to do, and all you can do is laugh. And obviously, these people don't fully understand the distinction. Nor, I think, some of those people understand the distinction, but their answer is always just like, "Yeah, well, the governments will stop it." And I think, the Bitcoiners' response with a twinkle in their eyes, like, good luck with that.
Yep.
You could slow things down, you can make it difficult, but you can only hold back the tide for so long. And I think a lot of people fail to see that.
Torrents still exist.
Right.
Okay,
Exactly.
and that's the thing, right? Like, I remember this from when I was a kid, right? Like, back then you had so this is going to age me. So there was Napster when I was a kid, right? To get music, and then all of a sudden it morphed into other things like Kazaa Lite and Morpheus and all these other programs, and then finally you had BitTorrent,
Mm-hmm.
okay, which just totally freaking stole the show. But the whole point I'm trying to make is that all of these decentralized technologies, like you said, can be slowed down for a time. They can be stifled for a time, but they can't be stopped.
Yeah.
And this is what people don't understand.
I agree, but it also is a good point, is a good example to use to point to a potential like threat or something that could slow Bitcoin down, because torrent still exists, but the vast majority of mainstream consumers, or a big portion at least, use a paid service like Spotify, or were on iTunes before, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they were like, okay, for the price and for not being considered a bad person or whatever, I'll go along with this. And so I think it could be the case that could happen, like with the advent of technology, with like Robinhood traders or Cash App people being able to buy like a fraction of a share of Tesla, combined with central bank digital currencies that allow you to make, payments quickly and efficiently and cheaply and all this kind of stuff. This could slow things down until the actual value prop of Bitcoin is like, until things, the ways in which the powers that be manipulate their currencies and the negative downstream effects of that is felt to such a degree that Bitcoin's value prop rises.
I like that.
Because like most people aren't looking for revolution, obviously.
No.
Like we've been saying, most people are apathetic at best, and so they just think like, as long as like I can support myself, watch some TV, go to the movies every now and then, and have a nice meal here and there, I'm not going to I'm not going to rock the boat. And so they're far less idealistic than people like you or I. And fair enough, like not everyone's going to be a revolutionary, to use those terms. And so those people will scoop up those imperfect solutions that are offered to them, because they're solutions for problems. Well, because they don't perceive the problems of that Bitcoin provides solutions for. And so they'll think, Libra coin is the greatest thing since sliced bread. Yeah, I get to pay somebody in Zimbabwe for, I don't, happens immediately, blah, blah, blah. So it could possibly mean that Bitcoin gets slowed down for that reason. But it's difficult for me to believe that the level of manipulation and abuse of the currency by central banks today cannot cause, like, I think it will cause too much disruption in a relatively short period of time to not be felt by mainstream people, and to not cause people to be angry or look for a solution or something like that. Like we were saying, like currency, your fiat currencies have failed throughout history, and they usually fail in the same way, where governments get in trouble, they print the shit out of it to try to paper everything over, crisis of confidence in the currency collapse, asset prices skyrocket while the currency drops, and eventually there's a complete loss of confidence in it. I don't know how close we are to that timeline. It's, like I said, it's hard for me to imagine, based on everything that's gone on, especially in the last 4 months, that we're not at least starting to see that on the horizon. Whether it's 1, 5, 10 years from now, it's impossible to say. But when that happens, I think the case for Bitcoin will be all the stronger, right? Because people won't be just looking for cheap, easy payments. Then they'll be looking for a way to protect themselves, and nothing will offer the level of protection that Bitcoin can offer ever. Like that's where the that the headline absolute scarcity of money will be, you know, ironed into people's minds because everything else in the world will be manipulated or abused or whatever, you know. I think, I mean, it seems like it may play out like that. I'm sure there'll be a lot of details and variables that none of us are currently considering that
Oh
enter
yeah.
the narrative. But
Oh, I totally agree. There'll always be the the black swan event that none of us foresaw, right? I want to
yeah,
go back though to something that you said about Robinhood fractional shares. So, I started buying stocks when I was 19. Um, I I had never heard of being able to, as a retail investor, to be able to buy fractions of shares.
hmm
Okay, until this, if I am not mistaken. I have an E-Trade account. I've never been able to buy fractions of shares as a retail investor, who's not putting in, gobs and gobs of money.
yeah,
So this to me screams liquidity crisis. To me, this what this tells me is that they need the average Joe's money, because if there's anything I've ever learned about financial institutions is, they're not going to give you something unless it's good for them.
right,
Okay, so the piece about this is already the way that share structures work today, they are IOUs. Back in the day, you used to actually get a certificate and everything like that. Today, it's an IOU from the brokerage that you're using. I think you're like 3 spaces removed from the actual shares themselves, or 2. Yeah, it's like it's your brokerage and then some other. I'm not sure what that's called, like a clearinghouse. I'm not even sure.
right.
But you don't actually own those shares. And I guess my point is, I personally think this Robinhood thing starts a snowball and gets more people in, and other companies are going to do it. The same bullshit that the mortgage crisis did, maybe on a smaller scale. Okay, but I think that this collapses horribly. I think that we're going to find out that companies are selling shares that don't exist. We've already had this happen a few times where companies, quote unquote, sold more shares than existed, which isn't
hmm
supposed to be possible, but here we are. So
Yeah.
I guess my thoughts, I guess my question to you is, what are your thoughts on that? What do you think?
Look, man, if Wall Street has proven anything, it's that they don't mind a little bit of fraud. Okay, so that's completely within the realm of possibility.
Just a little.
Uh, yeah, but when and I'm not sure if it's right. I know Cash App does the fractional of the fractions of a share thing. Maybe Robinhood does as well. But in any case, the reason why I brought it up in the previous statement I made is because if, like, basically kind of the cashification of other financial assets. And by that I mean, if the liquidity of other financial assets is such that you can buy in extremely small amounts and it's almost immediately liquid, like I can hop on Cash App and sell shares in Tesla and convert to cash and pay for my steak dinner sort of thing, then like that gives the debasement of the cash an added like bit of runway, because what you'll probably find is like people will just move for their cash holdings to equally liquid financial assets, right? And this is kind of how companies manage cash holdings. Like companies will bonds are an extremely liquid form of basically cash, right? But down on the consumer level, if I have any inkling that either one, stocks are going up, which hello, like this is what we're in right now, or two, that my money is losing value, and I have this option over here within the same app where I can be
Mm-hmm.
like, oh well, I'll just hold one of those stocks that's like going up, 10% a month or whatever or more, and when I need to spend, I'll just be like, sell cash, scan the QR code, great, thanks, give me my Wendy's. And so I like, and this is actually, I was speaking with Gene Epstein. I've spoken to him twice now. He's a wily old, Austrian economist, New Yorker. But he, and again, I haven't read like much of the Austrian stuff. I definitely want to, but I haven't done that yet. But he was saying that some, and I'm not sure if it was Mises or another one, basically saying that the cash as a medium of exchange And he makes the case not a store of value. Now, I don't see how you can separate the two, just rationally thinking about it. But he was basically saying, if you could hold any asset up to the moment that you want to exchange it for another one, and you just move for a split second into cash in order to facilitate that transaction, then that's what people would do rather than having to store value long term in cash. I disagree with that premise, but what I'm trying to say is that I think that type of scenario is forming now around the world. And to what degree will that allow the abuses in a monetary system to persist, because people will have that flexibility to move, to basically save in other liquid financial assets and spend almost directly from them. You liquidate a financial asset, you spend from that. And so how much runway will that give them? Because people will be able to keep pace with or outpace inflation. And as a result, well, they may not be that unhappy about inflation, and people look at where we're at today, right? Everyone's seen the photo of Jim Cramer on the TV, 40% unemployment or whatever it was, and stocks hitting all-time highs. And you see that and you go, well, that's odd. That's weird. Whatever. Next segment, next TV show, whatever. But these are the signs that there's just one, incredible dislocation, but two, in that this stuff is happening right before most people's eyes, this devolution, this debasement that we've been talking about, but people aren't really identifying it or labeling it as such. And, I think of places and circumstances like in Venezuela, where things were great for a long time, happy days, everyone's wealthy, there's tons of revenue coming in. And then within the span of 5 years, you get this crazy rampant inflation that erodes the value of everybody's savings. But the stock market is booming. And there, the inflation got to such a level that it was, pretty easy to point and say something is horribly wrong. But interestingly, and the government is still in power there.
Yep.
And so that hasn't deposed them. It hasn't caused enough of a stir to foster a genuine massive uprising to get rid of the people that ruin that. And my concern is right now, and I think the stock market is being used so politically, especially in the United States.
Oh, yeah.
If the stock market is doing well, then everyone on TV just says, oh, hey, times are good. Obviously, look at the stock market. Everything's great. And so how much is that hiding in terms of the damage that's being done to the money in the system? And when that gravy train stops, if it ever does, I mean, presumably with infinite inflation, you could see ridiculous stock market prices, especially in the context of using liquid financial assets as currency. But how long does that last? How long can the ruse be pulled over people's eyes, where they just kept the misdirection and be like, no, don't look over there where things are horrible. Look over there. Everything's up and to the right. Everything's great, good. Everything's great. Oh, forget about the poverty and the homelessness and the social unrest on the streets and the, proportion of people on food stamps and the 50% of people that don't have, $400 in their bank account and can't afford an emergency expense. Forget all that. Look at that over there. The stocks are pumping, baby. Yeah, it's good times. How long can that last?
Right?
We'll see, I guess.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I mean, I personally, to your point, I think it's completely being used for politics, the stock market. I think it absolutely, what it shows, if anything, let's just imagine it's not entirely rigged, okay? So let's say it's not, then it's a whole bunch of people trying desperately to fight off inflation. If it's not entirely rigged. But if you ask me, I don't really see, with the amount of job losses that there are, okay? Right now, if you take a look at it, right, people technically would have started getting unemployed, let's say in March. I've been figuring this out myself. You have about 6 to 8 months unemployment. So that's going to run out in August, September.
I think that's the timeline where the insolvencies start rolling in.
Yep.
And it's a whole nother chapter in this saga, and it could get weird. We're going to have to wait and see, obviously. But people can that lifeline only lasts for so long. So
that's right. So to your point, I see people spending out there, but I think it's I think the economy. I think the economy definitely took a massive hit, and I think it's bigger than they think.
Totally, I totally agree. But this whole conversation we're having does beg the question, especially in the context of what the technology now permits in terms of ways to interact with financial assets. What is the necessity or imperative or demand for sound money? Like, why should we expect anybody to demand sound money in an environment where you can so fluidly move between different financial assets? Like, I think we would have answers, because we realize the benefits. We see the ways in which, the people that control the ability to create and issue currency have this massive imbalance of power and blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. But if I'm the average person, why do I give a fuck about sound money?
You don't. That's the honest to God truth. I mean, like, let's be honest. To the average person, they're only going to notice when it's too late. Mm-hmm. That is what happened. I mean, that, to be perfectly honest, if you look back at crashes like the 1929 crash, it's like you only know that you're suffering once you're suffering for some reason. The average person doesn't seem to really care as long as the paycheck keeps coming in.
Right.
I so many people, like I see there, like guys that I work with too, guys in their 60s and stuff like that. And they're just happy to get their government check. Like they get their paycheck, but look, I'm getting this extra $1,200. And it's like, you're not getting anything. It's like, this is much worse than you think. You know what I mean? Like they just destroyed, definitely crippled the world's economy. And then, on top of that, printed more money than we ever have before in the shortest period of time we've ever done it. So this is like I don't even know how to explain it, but like, to me, it's like the iceberg is so massive below the water that people just don't realize it. I can't explain it any other way.
It's almost like the ultimate in high time preference, except it's high time preference reality, where you don't accept any other reality than the one that's immediately in front of you. And what could be a more high time preference than that? Versus a lower time preference reality is creating that space, stepping back and saying, okay, I'm seeing one thing. Like, what are the other processes, or what kind of other picture could I understand that might be unfolding, like, beneath the surface, not immediately, but what process am I in the middle of? And like you say, I think so many people won't be motivated to act until they're absolutely forced to, until it's a necessity. And that again is the story of history, right? There's a few that see the writing on the wall, or the tanks rolling in, or whatever the corollary or comparison is. But most other people will think everything is fine until it's dramatically not fine, I guess.
That's right. Until they are what's the word I'm looking for? Not discomforted, but kind of like, until they're displaced, until their comfort levels are displaced.
Yeah, I remember my dad used to tell me this. He said a recession is when you lost your job. A depression is when I lost my job. Or when you lose your job, and depression is when I lose my job. And it's kind of like that, right? It's like, it's not a big deal until it actually strikes home to you.
Bingo. Yeah,
and there's some quote in there. I'll butcher it, but it's something like they came for so and so, and I didn't care because I didn't know that person. They came for so and so, and I didn't care because I disagree with that person. They came for so and so, and I didn't care because whatever X reason. And then they came for me, and there's nobody left to care. Like, it's kind of
that's true
scenario.
It is. It absolutely is. And it kind of, I mean, it's kind of interesting, right? It's almost like a play on groupthink in a way, right? Because, a human being, like, I always like to say, a person is intelligent, a group is not.
Right.
So you can put an intelligent group of people together, and they will no longer be intelligent anymore because they will now all be subject to groupthink.
100%.
So there's kind of that too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh man, dude, this has been crazy.
I can't believe it. I can't believe it's been almost. Well, I guess we didn't start till like 8:45 my time, but time has flown, man.
Oh my god,
I'm loving this.
This is definitely awesome. John, I mean, like, this has been such a great chat. I guess I'm going to ask you for because I don't have any more questions or anything like that. I'm like all questioned out. Or actually, wait, one last thing. You mentioned, okay, so we're going back to your rabbit hole story just quickly. You talked about a securities analysis. I wanted to tell you when I was like when I was a kid and I got like to my late teens, I had gone down a similar path as you and had decided, okay, I understand that our money is shit and I need to, it's like you almost need to find a way to make money, but not simply using your labor, right? But using your money to make money. So I read a securities analysis, which I wasn't educated to the point where I could understand most of it.
Right.
Okay.
Me neither.
But it doesn't matter. I don't care. I never let that stop me. Never. It's like I'm a fool. I'm a cosmic fool. I don't care. I'll sit there and I'll go and try to read something I've never understood. It doesn't matter. If I can grab some kind of stardust from it, so be it.
Exactly.
But I also wanted to add, did you ever read as well The Intelligent Investor?
Of course.
Right? Of course. So I just want to add those two books, okay, for people that are like wanting to get into what were you going to say?
Well, I was just going to say, so I remember the version I wrote. It was Buffett and was it Phil Fisher? Were they co-authoring on it, or
for Intelligent Investor?
Or was it Ben Graham?
Ben Graham
and somebody else.
It was Ben Graham and somebody else, but I don't remember who.
Right, but yes, I did, and similar to you, especially security analysis because that's a thick book. Of course, I didn't know what the fuck most of it meant, but I was like, this is the book.
Yeah,
this is the one that everybody reads. This is the guy, and this was Buffett's like mentor, and right. Buffett's pretty good at what he does, so this is where I should start. And you of course you kind of almost kidding yourself, like same with you. If I think I can get anything from it, I'll spend the time to get it. But of course I was somewhat like kidding myself, thinking like I'm going to just absorb all this book and then I'll be like off to the races. Most of the time I was probably just reading it with my eyes crossed, being like, what? A little too dense for the 17-year-old John, but whatever.
Yes, I was going to say it was too dense for, in my case, it was the 19-year-old Phil. So yeah, man, it was definitely, but I still think it's worth reading. And another one that I found very influential, not that I think people should be buying stocks right now, but it definitely helps to get, I think it's very important to read to understand the mindset behind value investing. I think it's one of the most important things. One book that really helped me also was The Warren Buffett Way, which was Warren Buffett's book. And that's where he just goes through all of his, not all of his investments, but his major investments. So he explained how he created Berkshire Hathaway. He explained, well, I shouldn't say created, essentially how he bought it, converted it, and did all kinds of stuff like that. He talks about, Coca-Cola, American Express. He also talks about his worst investments, which are the airlines. So stuff like that. And I found that very interesting and insightful. And that's what got me to read A Securities Analysis and The Intelligent Investor.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I don't think I've read that. The last Buffett book I had and read was, again, I think it was in 2005 or something. But it was a blue book, very thin, and I'm pretty sure it was just a collection of his best annual letters to his shareholders.
Yes.
And that was cool because you get to see slices of times and the way he's thinking and the topics and issues that he's addressing. And I found that to be an interesting book as well. But Buffett's the king, and like you said, he is playing the game, right? And so yes. I kind of have a don't hate the player, hate the game mentality, and so you got to give credit where credit is due. But I like, I've heard Preston Pish talk about this lately. Kind of, if we're in this period where Bitcoin is going to be the best performing asset as it monetizes, fine, whatever, maybe you want to have a majority or a large position of your savings or portfolio in that. But obviously, there will come a time where that will slow, and you'll basically become a value investor again. You'll be looking out on the world, and you'll presumably be capitalized to some degree. The growth in Bitcoin will have slowed, and you'll be looking and saying, okay, where can I put my capital to work? And then then a lot of those same processes are gonna they're gonna be of value to you, because you can deploy a lot of this. Now, some of it will be different, just given the nature of the financial system you'll be operating in. But a lot of the things about valuing companies and teams and that kind of stuff, a lot of that is kind of evergreen, and we'll be looking out, and we'll be using Bitcoin as our denominator, and we'll be assessing things, and trying to grow capital wherever we think is best. And that'll be great. Then the world will kind of maybe getting back to like a sense of normalcy again. But I think that's probably going to be a little ways off in the future, because we're not at a point yet where you're going to want to relinquish your Bitcoin to support a company or something like that. I don't think.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely agree. So, okay, now I'm truly out. So, but do you have any final thoughts for the listeners?
Not really. Nothing comes to mind when I'm asked those questions, and I don't have much advice. But
that's awesome.
Only because I've been talking about it recently with people actually on that drinks and quarantine thing, and last night with My Living Truth and some other people. But Bitcoin obviously changes people in many different, varied, and beneficial ways. And one of the ways that it's influenced, and because I don't fall into the category of the people for whom it's changed much of my habits, routines, or my life, because I was already a kind of a Bitcoiner before Bitcoin in terms of my approach to things. But it's definitely given me a higher degree of confidence and freedom in, one, kind of being myself, being genuine, and two, in feeling a freedom or confidence to express myself. And a lot of that expression is around Bitcoin, because I'm so infatuated with it and so intrigued by it. But I think that's what I'm seeing in a lot of Bitcoiners, whether it's people starting podcasts or people starting to write their thoughts down and publish them publicly for the first time, mixing up on Twitter. Like, all these people are just starting to be like, no, I can share my voice. I can share my thoughts and my opinions. I can put it in the mix, and that's part of me refining my voice. And it's also might even be beneficial to other people that are scooping it up. And so I don't have advice, but I think I love that process that's happening. I love the changes and the ways in which being aligned with this thing that is Bitcoin is giving people kind of like a little bit of extra confidence to engage in things that they find meaningful, and to not kind of be sheepish about being them genuinely themselves, and maybe being a bit of a different thinker, whereas before maybe you were a bit of a closet different thinker, but now you have this thing that's allowing you to be a out of the closet different thinker, and it's something that you can say, you can kind of point to as like we were saying earlier, that focal point that brings all these different disciplines and interests and understandings together, and use that and expressing. And I think this is what, like, I think Bitcoin will do its thing regardless of whoever is advocating for it, right? But it probably matters in aggregate in terms of a timeline and speed, how fast that happens. And I think it's like great. I don't think there can be too much expression around any aspect of what's happening and what people feel about this thing, because everybody's voice resonates differently with different people from different backgrounds, different mindsets, different demographics, ages, whatever. And so I just love what I'm seeing, which, because it seems that there's a a wave of people that are memeing, that are writing, that are podcasting, that are making videos, that are just like they're genuinely used, like inspired to express because of this thing. And I think that's wonderful. And I know we're going to see more of it, and I can't wait to see it.
Absolutely beautiful, man. Be creative, opt out, stack your sats, all the good stuff.
Absolutely.
So, John, it was an absolute pleasure to have you on my podcast, man. Thank you so much for joining me. And
dude, it was the pleasure was all mine. I really enjoyed it. Can't believe it's almost been 2 hours, but it does mean we'll just have to do it again sometime and pick up where we left off and go down some other routes. But I love what you're doing, man, and I really appreciate the invite.
Thank you, and I definitely echo that right back to you, man. Thank you so much.
All right, brother. Take care.
You too. I hope everybody enjoyed that discussion. I had a really great time talking with John. So his details are going to be in the show notes, along with a link to his podcast. And of course, if you want to reach me on Twitter or Telegram, I am at CoinIcarus. If you want to shoot me an email, I am coinicarus@funwithbitcoin.com. Catch you all next time, and thank you for listening.